Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is part 10 of this series of streams in which I'm working on a Node.js package of mine called caxa. The purpose of caxa is to package Node.js applications into a single executable binary. And specifically what we have been working on these past 2 weeks, this is the third week in which I'm working on this, is support for ARM architecture and fixing some bugs. And these will all lead to version 2.0 of the library. The bug that I'm working on right now, I'm going to continue the work that I started last Friday. So the bug that I'm working on right now has to do with what happens when you run an application packaged with caxa and it does not succeed, and then you run it again. So as a bit of context, the way that caxa works is it takes your Node.js application and the Node.js executable as well and packages all that into something called a self-extracting executable. So when you run this executable, it will extract your project into a temporary directory and it will run the project from there. The advantage of doing it this way is that it works with any kind of Node.js project and any version of Node and so forth. So the problem here is, suppose that you are in the middle of this extraction into the temporary directory and something goes wrong. Maybe you stop the execution of the program or something else happens. Then, if you try to run the program again, it will look at the same directory and it will see, oh, there is already something here, so I'll just use that. The problem is that whatever was in that directory is in an inconsistent state. So the correct way of handling this is to check if we are in the middle of extraction, either because a previous run failed or because we may have been running the executable multiple times at the same time. So one of the instances has not really finished extracting the directory, and another instance is also trying to check for that directory, so the directory is still in the process of being created. And I don't mean just the creation of the directory, but expanding the whole tarball with your project. So the solution that we have come up with on the last stream is this series of steps. Effectively, what we are doing here is we have a log file. And we create the log file before we start the extraction. We start the extraction, and when the extraction is over, we remove the log file. And then we still use this idea of reusing an existing directory. So if you have run caxa, or if you have run an executable package with caxa before, and you run it again, it will reuse that directory. It will not expand your tarball into the temporary directory. It will use the same temporary directory, but it will check first. It will check whether it needs to extract or not, because if there is some other extraction in the middle of happening, then we don't extract. We extract again. So if there is already an extraction in the middle of happening, it may be the result of a failed previous attempt of extraction or whatever, or maybe multiple executables running at the same time. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that directory is in an inconsistent state, so we don't use it. So the work here is to create a log file and then do the extraction, and then when that extraction is over, remove the log file. And that's the bit that we worked on last Friday. So we implemented this part. But this part we did not implement, which is the part that looks at the log file to determine whether we should reuse that cached version of the extracted directory. And between Friday and now, I learned a bit more about this idea of log files. And it seems that using a log file is not exactly what we want. Actually, what we want is a log directory. I don't fully understand the details, but it seems like creating a directory is atomic. while creating a file may not be, as far as I understand. I mean, creating a file involves opening that file for writing and then writing some data in there and then closing that file, and this process is not atomic. And everything that I could find was about macOS and Linux, so Unix-based operating systems. I don't know exactly the behavior in Windows, but the point here is if you use a directory as your lock, then creating a directory is atomic, and then you're guaranteed to have this lock properly work. So the first thing that I want to do is to change everywhere where we talk about lock files, we'll use a lock directory. So we have to do this change in the code as well. And I guess I will keep this on the side, the list of tasks, the list of steps, I'll keep it here on the right side. Or actually maybe here at the bottom, because otherwise the screen is just too narrow. So on step 1.1, we are in a position that the app directory does not exist. That temporary directory in which you will extract your Node.js application doesn't exist. So we have to extract. And we'll have to create a lock directory, which is sort of nice in retrospect that we have a lock directory here. First, because of the atomicity that I just explained, but also because we had to create a directory anyway. To create a lock file, we had to create the directory that would contain the lock file. So I think it's easier for us to just create a directory in the first place and call that directory a lock. So yeah, here we have the lock file, and every occurrence of lock file needs to be changed to lock directory. Or maybe even just lock, right? Guess it's a lock. And then here we have the path to the lock. And this is the directory that we want to create. And here what we had before was to first create a directory to contain the lock and then write a file that would be the lock. But what we are going to do instead is to remove this part that creates a file and remove this part that would look for the directory that should contain the lock. And now this is going to create a directory. So failed to create the lock directory. And then later we have remove. So I believe that this part is implementing, before I go to remove, I believe that this part is implementing 1.1.1 correctly. It's creating the lock directory. It creates the path to the lock and then uses make_dir_all to create the directory. And it's make_dir_all because it will create every folder in the chain that it needs to create. So if your temporary directory does not have a caxa directory, it will create it. If it doesn't have a locks directory, it will create it, and so forth. And now we need to remove the lock after extraction. So this bit is doing the extraction. We don't change this part. But then we remove the lock when the extraction is over. And I guess I need to go lang remove directory, because I'm not sure that remove, OS remove, will remove a directory. I think it will, but we have to check. Okay, so it seems like this deletes a directory as well. So OS remove deletes either a file or a directory, so we are good. 1.1.3 remains the same. Now I would like to test this. I would like to test these changes. So far we have implemented 1.1.1 and 1.1.3. So we are creating a lock directory, and then when extraction is over, we remove the lock directory. And I would like to check that the lock directory and everything is created properly. So I guess the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to build this stub, but I'm going to comment out some of the steps So for instance, I'm going to start by commenting out the part that removes a lock, and then we'll see if the lock is created. And then we'll start from scratch, create another stub, and then try to run this part that removes the lock. And by the way, if you're just tuning in right now, when I say this stub, it is, okay, remember, caxa is this thing that packages your Node.js application into an executable binary, and it's a self-extracting executable. So there is your whole application as a tarball in the file, but we need something to bootstrap the process, that's something that will be the program that extracts the tarball. And this is a Go program. I had to write it in a language that would compile into an executable binary, so I wrote it in Go. And this stub is this Go program that extracts the tarball. So this is literally the part of the Go program that extracts the tarball. And this is some Go code to create the lock file, lock directory now, and remove the lock directory. Okay, so with all that out of the way, we can run npm run build stub. And what this will do is compile the Go program and generate this stub file right here. So with that, we can run npx caxa to build. Not exactly this. So npx caxa help will give me some sample output or some sample commands. Oh no, I don't want to do that. What I want to do instead is ts node, because I am in the development directory. I have to run ts node source and then help. And this will give me a command that I can run to package a simple example application. This command right here. So let me copy that and npx ts node source, and then this echo command line parameters is a simple application that we are packaging, and everything in here seems to be okay in this line that I'm about to run. Okay, so I'm going to run this line, and now we need to go to the temporary directory because we want to inspect what's going on there. So I guess I will call node, and I will require os and then ostmp dir. So this is my temporary directory. Let me go there. No, not with Visual Studio Code. Oh, come on. Stop. Okay. Open this directory, and there is already some leftovers from our previous work, so I'm going to remove whatever is there. And then we have compiled this echo command line parameters application. Let's run it and look at what we find in the temporary directory. So there is the runs, and that is the temporary directory in which I extract your Node.js application. So the Node.js application is here with your index.js file. But more importantly, the locks directory has been created. This is the locks directory, and it has not been removed because I commented out the line that does step 1.1.3. So now I'm going to uncomment this line, rebuild this stub, recompile the program with the new stub, and I believe it makes sense for me to clean this. I will clean this directory, but what we are looking for is, I'm going to run the program, but I will have cleaned this, but I expect to see the logs directory with the command line, echo command line parameters directory there, but this directory with this random name will not be there. So let's clean this out. Run echo command line parameters. And now the logs, perfect. The logs folder has the echo command line parameters, but our log directory is no longer there. So it seems like we implemented this part correctly. Let's commit what we have here. Typically I would not commit this because it's so simple, but since I am new to this Go stuff, I'm being cautious. In fact, the reason why I wanted to build caxa, one of the reasons anyway, was so that I could get away with writing my projects in Node.js instead of using Go. I wanted the Go deployment and distribution experience because I really like how you can just hand people an executable and they can run it and that's their story. But I don't want to write my applications in Go. I just don't really like it as a language, and Node is more popular, has more packages. So I'm trying to write the minimum amount of Go that I have to in order to be able to use Node.js for everything else. Okay, so we have created the lock directory and removed the lock directory properly. Now, let's look at the lock directory, see if it exists, and then extract the application or not conditionally. So for that, we have to go up a bit, and we already have here some code that checks whether a directory exists. And in this case, it's checking for the app directory, which is our temporary directory. In fact, since I am calling this the app directory, I guess I will change the name of the temporary directory. Instead of runs, it will be apps. And then I don't know why I'm calling this the app directory. I think it should be called the application directory. So let me see. I will commit this simple change and I will do a big search here for app. And there are 11 files with matches, but I don't care about most of them. This is in the examples folder, so I'm not touching that. This is not a folder of any kind, so I don't care about it. And then I guess here we want to rename some things. I'm calling this the app directory. I guess I'll call this the application directory. I like longer, more explicit names, so I like how this reads better. Similarly, here we have some place where I'm creating a directory that is called app, so I guess I'll call this application. And here I have to change that as well. Let's continue with our search. So this is okay, application directory /application application directory append.app, blah blah blah. Seems like this is okay. Now let's go to this stub. Now app directory will be, so apps will be renamed to applications, and app directory will be renamed to application directory. So let's do a search for app again and make sure that we did not miss anything. So all of these I don't care about. This is an examples folder. This is a test, and all these occurrences are okay. This is also okay. And then in the Go code, everything seems to be okay as well. So now let's look at the changes real quick. Seems good. Looks good to me. I don't know why I call this the app directory. I wrote those lines, and I tend to prefer more explicit and longer names, so I don't know what was going on there. But in any case, so we are here, and then in our temporary directory, it will not be called /runs. It will be called applications. You know what? To make sure that of course that the directory name is correct, but more importantly to make sure that it did not break anything in this process, I'm going to rebuild this stub and do the whole shenanigans again. I will rebuild this stub, I will rebuild the echo command line parameters application, and I will run it, and I will look at the directory structure to make sure that the directory is under a new name. So yeah, seems good. So we have a logs folder, we have a builds folder. That's the temporary directory in which Caxa puts your application when building. So when we call this line here, and then the applications folder has our application in there as well. Excellent. Okay, just a bit of renaming, but everything went well. So as I was saying, we have this application directory, and that is where Caxa will extract your application. So we've already checked that this directory exists. So we have a bit of Go code here that builds this string, which is your application directory. And then we collect the information about this directory. We check if the error is that, if the error is not that the thing does not exist, then something went wrong with finding the stats, the information about this directory. So something failed catastrophically. And if the thing is a file, but it's not a directory but a file, then something was also catastrophically went wrong. If the thing is a directory, it used to be a no-op. Now it will no longer be a no-op because we have to check for the existence of the lock directory as we laid out here in this series of steps. So if the app directory exists, we are in point 1.2. That's our situation here. And then we need to inspect whether the lock directory exists. So the way I'm going to do this is similar to this part. So I guess now what I'm doing is look for the lock directory. So what I'm doing now is step 1.2.1. But this time it's not the application directory that I'm looking for, it is the lock. And it seems like this lock down here in step 1.1.1 and this lock here in step 1.2.1, they should be exactly the same. So what I'm gonna do is take this variable and extract it to the top. Maybe here. And then I don't need this right here. So we are now sharing this path for the lock. And I'm thinking about the order in which I want to do this. Do I want to have the name for the lock first, or do I want to have the application directory first? I don't know exactly, but for now it will be the lock first. Though it doesn't really make sense because we are looking at the application directory. Yeah, but the lock will always be used. Whether the application directory exists or not, we always want to check the lock. Either because we want to create it or because we want to check if it exists. So yeah, the lock will appear first here. Okay, so step 1.2.1 is check for the lock info. If it is not that it doesn't exist, fail to find information about It's not really the caxa directory here in this message. So here we are looking for the application directory. It's not really the caxa directory. It's more like application. Failed to find information about the application directory. And here, failed to find information about the lock. And if the lock is not a directory, here I want to rename this as well. So it's not the caxa path, it's the application directory already exists and isn't a directory. Yeah, I guess this message is kind of nonsensical because application directory already exists and it isn't a directory. So path to application directory already exists and is not a directory. Okay, I'm happy with that. And here, path to lock already exists and isn't a directory. I don't expect this to ever occur. Only if you are like intentionally making caxa trip, this will never occur. But in any case, so file lock info, then if the error is not that the thing doesn't exist, so fail to find information about the lock. If it's not a directory, then also fail catastrophically. And then we do a check that looks more or less like this. So if the error is nil and the lock blah 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 is a directory, then we'll do something. And we also have something similar to this. So in this case, lock exists, and in this case, lock doesn't exist. Okay, so coming back to our list of steps. Come on. So if the lock exists, this is step 1, 2, 1, 2. The lock, our lock directory exists. And I'll leave a to do here. And when the lock does not exist, then I am in this step. And I'm leaving a to do for myself here. Now let's look at what we should do when the lock does not exist. So remember, in this situation, we have an application directory that already exists, so a cache exists, and a lock does not exist. So in this case, we can use the cache. The cache is clean. We can use it. So in step 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, a previous extraction was successful, so go ahead and use the app directory. And this is our no op here. Directory already exists, so let me put this here. So here we say no op. Application directory already exists and a lock doesn't exist. So a previous extraction was successful. Use the application directory. Okay, no op. Application directory already exists and a lock doesn't exist, so a previous extraction was successful. Use the application directory and don't extract again. Use the application directory as a cache. Use the cached version of the application directory and don't extract again. Perfect. And here we have the step. So I'm taking out the to do. And here we have a step 1, 2, 1, 2. So we are here, 1, 2, 1, 2. So the application directory exists, but the lock also exists. So either a previous extraction was unsuccessful or it's in the middle of happening right now. So in that case, previous extraction was not successful or is happening right now and hasn't finished yet. In either case, pick another name for the app directory and go back to step 1. So at this point, we need to think about how we want to go back to step 1 and how we pick these different application directory names. I guess the simplest way to do this is to have something like a counter that we will append to the name, and this counter will be incremented. I'm now thinking about how to name this counter. I'll call this the extraction counter. So I'll create a variable called extraction counter, for the lack of a better name. It starts with the number 0. It could start with any number. And then when we create a lock and when we create the application directory, we append the extraction counter, and this expects a string, so we need to convert this to a string. I don't know how to do that. I'm new to Go, so Go convert int to string. Really? Is it that complicated? Cannot be that complicated. Convert number to string. String conv. This is to convert a string into a number, not what I want. To and from string representations of basic types. This is all from strings to basic types. I guess this may be what I want, like format int. So let's try that. str conv format int of extraction counter. Why are you putting this into int 64? I have no idea. And that also doesn't seem to work. Too few arguments. Really? I have to pass a base and it needs to be an integer 64. Can I just use the FMT package maybe? I may want to use I2A, so that's probably integer to array of bytes. Okay, let's try this again. str conv I2A. It takes an integer, it returns a string. Seems to be more like what I want, so let's try this guy. Okay, nothing complained, so this must be right. So now our extraction counter is being placed into both the lock and the application directories. And now we need a loop. So how do I write a for loop in Go? Okay, looks good. So it is very C-like. I can deal with this. So I guess our initial variable, I guess I can copy and paste this part from a tour of Go. And instead of I I will call this the extraction counter, and I don't want to have a limit. I want this to always keep running. I will have to manually break out of this. And then extraction counter blah. And then in here I don't do that. And then I take this whole block I am writing, and I put it in the loop. And then I format. Okay. But of course, we also will need the application directory later in the program, because we need to go to the application directory and run stuff from in there. So I will have here the application directory as, can I do something like nil, null, empty string. Okay, that's annoying, but I'll take it. Golang declare variable. Maybe if I say var space, so var application directory, and then in here I don't use this. So there's this syntax says I want to create a new variable right here. So if I do it like this, then it will change the existing variable instead of creating a new one on this block. But it seems like it's complaining about something. So invalid type. So I guess I need to say var and then the name and then the type. Something like this. And then because I don't have column here, it will assign to the variable up top here. And then it will use that same variable over here. So effectively what I'm doing is I am doing this whole loop to initialize this variable effectively. It will also happen to create the temporary directory. No, it will not even create this temporary directory. So the whole purpose of this is to create this variable and also to call the extraction routine here. So we have the extraction counter. It's not really a counter. I don't know. I'll keep this variable name as it is for now. Okay, so we are putting the lock in the lock and in the application directory. We are taking an account extraction counter, and then we are doing the bit to detect whether the application directory exists. If it exists, then we are in here, and then we do a bit to learn if the log file exists. And if it does exist, then we are in this situation. So if the log file exists, then I want to go around the loop because I need to go to the next extraction counter. So probably if I say continue, this will go around the loop. So yeah, both the application directory and the lock exist, so I go around the loop. And in this case, I want to break out of the loop. So I say break. And now this is no longer a no-op, because I'm doing a break here. And I will do a similar comment saying application directory exists already or whatever. Application directory exists and a lock also exists. So something like this. So application directory and a lock and lock. Application directory exists and lock also exists. So a previous extraction wasn't successful, or an extraction is happening right now and hasn't finished yet. In either case, start over with a fresh name. So by a fresh name, I mean increment the extraction counter, and that will create a new lock and application directory files or paths, and that's that. So let's go over the whole shenanigans once more to see if we are missing something, and then we'll try to test this. So I mentioned this last Friday, and I'm going to mention this again. The strategy for testing this will be to go to the command line and try to force the error cases and comment out some parts of the code like we just did in this stream, but I'm not interested in writing unit tests for this because that would be hard to do. So because I'm not writing unit tests for this, I think it's beneficial for me to go once again over the whole algorithm. So look at the app directory, this directory. So I guess I will rename app directory to application directory. And I will also start removing these comments. They were a scaffold just for me to read and make sense of things. So we have here the extraction counter. I really want to rename this variable. Extraction attempt. Okay, I prefer this name. So if the application directory does not exist, that case is right here. If the application directory does not exist, create a lock file or lock directory, start extraction, the use of repeat below is lower even for... Okay. The use of repeat below is to lower even further. That doesn't read right. The use of repeat below is to make it even more improbable. Is that a word? Okay. That the separator will appear literally in the compiled stub. Okay, that phrase reads better. Oh, there is an issue with our algorithm. The issue is, if I end up in this situation where I do all the extraction and then I get to the end of it, the loop will go around once again. So I want to break out of the loop in this situation as well. It's good that I'm rereading this. Okay, so create the lock directory, start extraction, then remove the lock. I want more screen space here because I can see this whole algorithm here, and I like the way it reads. I'm creating a lock and I'm releasing the lock, so it more or less feels like acquiring a lock and doing this in the critical section of that lock. Awesome. And I did not change in this whole series of streams, I did not change these lines. Well, I changed the separator, but it didn't change the logic in here, so that part must still be working. I won't bother rereading that. Okay, so that is all of these steps. Now, if the application directory does exist, it is a directory, then look for the lock directory. That's what I'm doing right now, the lock directory. And then I have to do a song and dance here to make sure that I can get the information from the lock directory. And if it's not a directory but a file, I also fail. But in any case, I get to this point where the lock directory doesn't exist. That happens here. And then application directory exists Application directory exists and a lock doesn't exist, so a previous extraction was successful. Use the cached version of the application directory and don't extract again. Break. And in this case, so that's those cases right here. The lock directory already exists. No, it is this case. So a lock directory doesn't exist. And if the lock directory exists, then application directory exists and the lock also exists. Okay. Application directory exists and lock exists as well. So a previous extraction wasn't successful, or an extraction is happening right now and hasn't finished yet. In either case, start over with a fresh name. Continue, which makes me go around the loop. I'm now just staring at the code to see if something stands out. But it seems like we are good. So now we need to test this. But before I even start testing stuff, I know that I will have to test by commenting out parts of the code and whatnot. So I want to commit before I even start. So we are now doing a integer to string conversion. So we need that. And then all these changes look good and I'm happy with everything I have here, so I will commit this. And now let's get rid of this binary that we have. So how are we going to test this? I guess I can use the echo command line parameters thing and try to stop it in the middle so that it leaves the lock behind. We already checked this whole part about creating a lock and releasing the lock, so we believe that that works. We just have to test the part that looks for a lock and then goes to a next folder. Oh, I can also create the lock by hand. That's not hard to do. So we don't have anything here. Let's build the stub. Let's build the echo command line parameters application using the new stub. And let's run the application once. Before I do that, let's look at the structure of the caxa directory. So we have a builds directory here, but whatever, we can get rid of that. We can get rid of the whole caxa directory. So we run echo command line parameters. And then we have the applications folder, and we have here attempt 0 was successful. And here we have a locks, and we don't have a 0 directory, so that means that the lock was released. So if we run the application again, it is faster to run, and it does not create a new extraction. But if I come in here and create a new directory, how do I create a directory? Open in new tab. Okay, open in new tab. How do I create a directory? New folder, and then I call it 0. So effectively, I am simulating here as an unsuccessful run because the lock was left there. So we run the application again, and it's somewhat slower. It creates the one lock, it creates the one extraction, and it uses that one. And then if I run it again, it will be super fast because it's using the one version. So I believe we nailed it first try. Awesome. So we made extraction atomic. I'm very happy with this. Okay. Yeah. Feeling good. Next, add command line parameters to customize the preparation of the application. So we can say goodbye to this complicated and weird looking Go code and return to our lovely TypeScript code. So this to-do item has to do with many people asking for customization. So I am doing many things here by default that I think most people would like when they're packaging an application, but it seems like people want to do different things. So I'm going to give them more options. So what we have to do here is I can think of two ways of doing this. I can either go to all the issues that people opened and try to address them, or I can look at the code and see every decision that is kind of hard-coded, and I can parameterize it. And I believe that doing everything here in the code will be better because we will make sure that we are parameterizing everything that the code is doing, which is also a good opportunity for us to revisit the code and see everything that it does as a sort of code review. And it will be good because I don't remember many things here myself, so it will be good to get a refresher on that. Okay, so caxa is a simple function that will take the stub, create a tarball of your application, append it to the stub, and append some JSON to the end of it. That's a very simple task. So let's see what happens. I receive as arguments input, output, and command. Input is the directory in your that has your Node.js application. Output is the name of the executable that needs to be created, and command is the command that you want to run when the application has been extracted into a temporary directory. So first of all, I check, does the input exist? If it does not exist, or if it's not a directory, then the path to package isn't a directory. I would like to maybe change this to the path to your application isn't a directory. Bam. Identifier. So the identifier is going to be the name of the directory. So we looked at, for instance, this directory structure, caxa, or temporary directory, caxa, applications, and then identifier is echo command line parameters / a random identifier or random string. So we will look at the output, which is the name of the executable we are going to generate. We remove any extensions from it. So we remove the .app or .exe that may be there. And that will be our directory name here. And then we also create a random string of 10 characters. That's our identifier. And every time you create an application with caxa, you get a new identifier. Well, I would like to make this parameterizable because some people want to hard code the identifier. I remember reading about this in one issue. Now, I don't know exactly what I want to do here. Maybe I want to parameterize the identifier, but maybe I want to parameterize the application's directory. Let's see all the contexts in which the identifier is used. It's used here when building, but that's not essential because we just need a temporary directory for the build. So the fact that we are using an identifier here is non-essential. It's kind of nice because you get to see the name of the application that was built, but that's not essential. So really the place that is essential with this is this place right here. So thinking about whether I want to make this parameterizable and how I want to make it parameterizable. Because one of the things that people asked for was to not extract into a temporary directory, but that is not the business of the packager. That is the business of the Go part, which is the stub, because that's the part that will extract into a temporary directory, so we would have to change that. but I cannot hardcode the whole path because a temporary directory may be in a different location. So I cannot hardcode the whole application directory. Cannot hardcode that. I'll have to think more about this, but before I think about this application directory, it's not really the application directory, it's the build directory. So I'm going to rename application to build, and let's see all the places where this is used. Okay, so I guess I can just rename this variable. And so far I have just renamed some things and changed some messages, but I would like to commit this so I don't have to commit a lot of things to my memory. So, okay. The identifier is something that you may want to provide. Okay, Felipe says something on the chat. Hi Felipe, it's nice to have you here. The person that posted the PR about this issue just wanted to be able to set something else instead of the random variable. Okay, so in that case, I guess I can just but that's a bad idea really, because then you would be able to run caxa multiple times and end up with the same build directory, which would blow things up. But if that's what they want, I don't know, it's up to them. I guess I will document this as like advanced options that you should probably never use. Felipe says mostly so they can see my app /version 100 instead of my app /random characters. Yeah. Yeah, so in that case, they would be responsible for creating that unique string, and supposedly they would only run caxa once per version, so I guess that would work. Okay, so I could parameterize the random string, or I could parameterize the whole thing. So I guess I will parameterize the identifier. So the identifier is identifier question mark string, and then we have a duplicate, but by default it will be this. And then here this output. Oh, that works. That's awesome. I wonder if this really works. I have never seen code that looks like this, but okay. I mean, what would happen if I had a default here that referred to identifier in some way, like path, join, identifier. Parameter output cannot reference identifier. Identifier declared after it. Oh, that is super magical of JavaScript. Okay. So the order of the parameters matter, though this is a JavaScript object, so the order of the parameters should not matter, but are maintained. Weird stuff. Alright, fine by me. So the identifier is now parameterizable. Please don't parameterize this. Please don't pass this. Please use the default. Felipe says, I just learned something new today thanks to you. What did you learn? This? I was learning about this as well. I mean, the fact that you can have a default argument, that I knew, but the fact that a default argument can refer only to previous default arguments, that's weird. I didn't know about that. So the build directory, I don't think I need to parameterize because it will go away. And You know what? What if the build directory uses the identifier, and then we put the identifier here? How about we don't call it identifier? How about we call it something like application directory? Yeah. So yeah, what I'm thinking about is the build directory. I don't want to rely on identifier. I don't trust that you are going to pass me unique identifiers every time. So what I'm going to do is just create a new one. I will create, maybe I just put a crypto random string here. So maybe I just create a unique identifier in there, or maybe I put the path name in there as well to help people debug stuff. But this build directory, I really don't care about this build directory. And then I could call this the application directory. Kind of like this. Yeah, I was exchanging emails with a person who helped me write some of this code for Caxa last week, David. And I mentioned all the things we could work on, including this that we are doing right now, which is to parameterize the build. And he said, yeah, that will be trivial. And it is. It is trivial to extract some variables. The part that is not trivial is the 3 hours of thinking that goes into the right way to parameterize everything. Felipe says, I think you can pass an override option when copying, so you don't care if the identifier is unique. Think it will just get overwritten. When copying? What's that about? Oh, okay, here. When copying. Okay, so that will just overwrite stuff. Yeah, that's fine. But what happens if you're building multiple binaries at the same time in parallel? Yeah, that could get weird. Not that it would ever happen, but that would get weird. So, yeah, I'm really tempted to change this identifier stuff. No, I'm going to call it the identifier. Yeah, that's the identifier of this build, let's say. It's the identifier for this build, for this executable. All right, so identifier stays as it is, but it's not used in the build directory, because you may be building multiple times with the same identifier to get everything to work, and then you finally get something to work. So the build directory, you know what? I think we will delete the build directory at the end anyway. So yeah, it will be just a random string here. Whatever, let's move on. So copy. Okay, so in this line, I remember something that we need to parameterize. So this copy function is not from Node.js's file system operations. It's from this package called fs extra. And it has an option, supposedly, to ignore some paths. Someone mentioned this in an issue. They wanted to ignore some paths. So let's see. Source and destination. Felipe says, I would love if you implement the filter option. I guess that's what we are about to do. So in the options, a function to filter copied files and directories. Return true to copy them and false to ignore it. Can also return a promise that resolves to true or false, or pass in an async function. So, it seems like this is a function, not a list of files. But the intent here is sometimes you don't want to copy your whole application into the build directory. For instance, you may want to not copy the .git directory. So let's pass this filter in, how do I call it? So either I can accept a function here or I can accept a list of paths. I guess I will accept a function. So I'll call this function the filter, for the lack of a better name. And the identifier is only used at the end, while the filter will be used first. So I guess I'll put filter before identifier. No, I'll say that input, output, and command are the things that you definitely want to pass. Then I guess I'll go by priority. So filter is higher priority. And filter is a function that returns a Boolean like this. It can also return a promise. So it could be promise of Boolean. Okay, I guess this will get weird. Why don't I just go to the TypeScript for copy and then go to copy options and then to filter. And then I can get a hold of this, which will be available with fs extra. So I can say just fs filter copy sync or fs filter copy async. Let me double check what I just did. So copy takes copy options and filter takes that. All right. And then the filter that we actually want to use is a filter that I need to provide a default. I could do it like this. I just copy the whole directory. I kind of like this because there is no magic going on here. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. No magic whatsoever. So the filter lets everything through. Next. Kind of second guessing what I just wrote, but I guess that's all right. So next, we run some commands to prepare your application for packaging. And this is something we want to parameterize. For one thing, I got it wrong. Apparently, by reading the comments on the issues, I got some parts here wrong. Specifically, when you run dedup, it undoes the work of pruning. So you end up with all your development dependencies in the final build. Yuck. So I guess this is too much magic anyway. I kind of like pruning, so that may be something that I hard code, but dedup, definitely too much magic. So I guess I will run. So the thing about pruning is this. You're going to put caxa in your development dependencies. So if you run prune before you try to run caxa, that won't work. So if you have some sort of build script in which you prune first and then call caxa, it will fail because prune will get rid of your development dependencies, including caxa itself. So for this reason, I think it makes sense for caxa to hard code this prune production stuff. But of course, I will make this parameterizable. So I'll have another parameter here called prune, which by default will be true. And then prune will be a Boolean. And then if prune, then do that. So any commands you would like to run, think about the build script. We may want to run more commands in the build directory. So prune is definitely one of them. Do you want to run some commands before prune? I don't think so, because if you wanted to, you would run that command before you run caxa in the first place. But after prune, you may want to run some extra commands. So what I'm gonna do is for build commands of, or build command of build commands, await exec A in the build directory for sure. I will run your build command. And of course I need to pass that as an argument. So build commands, none. I don't want any build commands by default. After prune, I will have a build command or I could just call a function, right? The build commands can be an array of commands, or it could be a function that gets called, and then you could do whatever. Yeah, I think that's better. I mean, why hard code this, limiting you to pass command line arguments when you could run any JavaScript you want? So I guess what I will have instead is build extra steps, or yeah, build extra steps, and you probably want the build directory at this point. So I'll give you the build directory because everything else you kind of gave me. The input, the output, the command, the filter, prune, identifier, all these things you can give me. But the build directory I created, and it's random, so you won't get a hold of it. So I will pass that to you. Okay, Felipe says maybe you should check that node modules exist before running prune. I could check, but I don't think I need to. So let's go real quick to tmp make dir Felipe, and then in the Felipe directory, of course, there is no node modules folder, but I can run npm prune production and it will succeed. I think it will even create, no, it will not create node modules, but it will create a package JSON. What is in that package JSON? Nothing, so whatever, doesn't really matter. At the worst, you will end up with an extra file in your build, whatever. So build commands, it's not build command, it's build extra steps, which by default will be a function that does nothing. And then here, the build extra steps will be a function that receives a string, which is your build directory, and returns void. Or doesn't return, really. Better way of saying it. So build extra steps. I don't like this name. Build function, build, prepare build. Prepare is a nice thing. So yeah, prepare. Prepare build, prepare. So filter the copy, prune, prepare, identifier, looking good. So now I will copy the node executable into your build directory. The node executable being the node executable that is running caxa itself, which I think is a super nice trick. So that's something that also people want to parameterize, because sometimes people want to install node using npm. That's more like a cross compilation situation, I think. But there is an npm package called node that installs node, which is super recursive and circular and weird, but that's something you can do. So installs node into your project, and it puts it into the node modules bin directory. It's kind of cool. Is that Coraline? No. Okay, so some people don't want to copy the build, the node executable. So after prepare, copy node, or include node, and it will be, why is this a column? It should be equals. Okay, better. So include node, by default it will be true, but you can tell me not to. Oh, not string, boolean. Okay, so include node. So if include node, then that. And then my code, I really don't like how parameterizing everything makes my code look weird. I have to if everything. If prune, blah. If include node, blah. But I guess that's just the nature of the game. So now, ensure the directory of the output. That happens every time. And then I have two ways of building. One is a novelty. I can create a .app, or I can do the thing that I think most people will do, which is this. So I'm going to go over the .app. So if the process platform is not Darwin, I am not in macOS, I error saying that building a .app is only for macOS. Then I remove the output. What? Okay, so what I'm doing here is effectively I want to overwrite a .app directory if it already exists. So I have that. Maybe I could ask if you want to overwrite the output, but too many options. No, I will always overwrite stuff. Because then I would have to check if the output directory exists, which boils down to one more line that looks like this. Okay, I'll do it. So next. Maybe this one is higher priority and it goes here. Yeah, whatever. Overwrite. By default it will. By default it will, or will it not? Let's see what move does on the command line. So if I go back to my lovely tmp Felipe directory and I move, so I have two files here. If I move package JSON to package lock JSON, it overwrites. So, okay, so will I. By default, it will overwrite. And then right after command, I will put an overwrite, which is by default, which is a boolean. So I guess I can check this right in the beginning. So I can check the input here. I will also check the output. So I'll check the output. And I don't need to check if it's a directory. I can just check if it exists. So if the output path exists and it's not the case that I'm overwriting, then I will throw an error. Output already exists. And because I did this check right in the beginning, it's correct, safe, and the right thing to do for me to remove the output, because I am overwriting in this case. So either the path does not exist, in which case this is probably a no-op, or the path does exist, but you want to overwrite, because if the path existed and you didn't want to overwrite, you would have failed already. So, yeah. Then I need to create a directory. I need to move the build directory there, and I need to ensure another directory, and I need to put some stuff there, a script, and write a file to the right place, and blah, 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 whatever. And that's done. Awesome. Next. Okay, so here I need to check, am I in Windows? And if my output doesn't end with .exe, then I need to blow up. In fact, I don't know exactly why I am doing this check so late. After I have already copied your application to the right place, copied Node, ran all the npm prune whatever. I did a lot of work already. So why am I checking this so late? I should probably check this sooner. So I guess I'll check this right in the beginning. I'm already doing a bunch of checks here for the output, so I guess I will do that here as well. Okay, I want to take this last 10 minutes that I have to test something. I could finish this. Probably isn't too much, but I'm really curious to learn more about the prune problem that we looked at before. So we are running npm prune production whatnot. I want to test that further because I don't know how it behaves and I want to learn about it. So I'll go into my Philippi directory and I remove the package lock.json so I have a clean slate, and I will npm install something. What am I going to npm install? Something that is fast to install. Caxa is probably fast to install, so I guess I will install it as a dev dependency, but let's think about something else that has few dependencies, maybe TypeScript. And I will also open Visual Studio Code here. So yeah, I have my little project in which I have installed TypeScript. No dependencies, so just that. And then in here I have my dependencies. I will add my dev dependencies. Caxa will be my dev dependency, or I will do that in the command line, why not? So npm install dev caxa. And then in here I have a bunch of things now because Caxa has a bunch of dependencies, but that's fine. Caxa is in there. And now I run npm prune production. This should get rid of everything except for TypeScript. And it does. And then npm dedupe. And then everything else is back there, including Caxa. Is there something like dedupe production? There is. Let's look at the docs real quick. Npm dedupe. And what happens if I have everything, including dependencies, for development, and then I run dedupe production? Does it get rid of the development dependencies? It does. Awesome. So what I want is not to prune. It's to dedupe. You may be wondering, what does dedupe does? What does dedupe do? It gets rid of duplicate dependencies. You know how your node modules can have nested dependencies in there? It gets rid of the nested dependencies. It gets rid of the repeated dependencies. That's what it does. So it slims down, reduce duplication in the package tree. So if you have a package A that depends on B and D and both depend on C, it flattens that dependency structure so that there is only one version of C, as long as, of course, these versions are compatible. If they are not compatible, if packages B and D depend on different versions that are incompatible, of different versions of C that are incompatible, then I think it will keep both versions, but it will do its best. So I guess dedupe is the command that I wanted to run in the first place, but I wanted to run it in production mode. So I guess that's the command that we actually want to run. Awesome, so I learned something about dedupe. Cool stuff. Let me check this again. So if I have all the development dependencies in there and then I run dedupe production, I end up with just production dependencies and they have been deduplicated. Happy. I am happy. Okay, so I'll go here over this last bit of the code in this last 5 minutes that I have. So what's going on here? We are copying the stub into the output. Then we are changing the mode. We wrote this together last Friday. And then we are creating a tarball and we are appending to the output the tarball. We are piping the archive stream. We are putting the build directory in there. I don't know why it says false in here. Okay, because I want the thing to be on the root of the tarball, and then finalize, and then here is a fix me. Use stream promises when node 16 lands. Okay, node 16 has landed. Now there is an LTS version that has the feature, but I don't think we are there yet because people are still using node 14 and also 16 is still not in LTS. I think that will happen later in the year. So we'll keep this, which is sort of a polyfill for stream promises. And then we will append to the file the thing that was being appended before. So nothing in here will change. Looks good. And I didn't change input, output, or command. I just added stuff. So the tests should still be passing. And I'm in the Felipe directory, so the tests don't pass there. But in the caxa directory, the tests should still be passing. While we wait, let's look at the options here. Oh my god. We'll have to add all those options that you can use programmatically to the command line version as well. Yuck. Okay. Oh, one test failed. That's interesting. No, all tests failed. That's interesting. Enable to compile TypeScript. What? What? Okay, hang on. I'm going to commit what we have because we have a lot. So we overwrite. Okay, filter, fine. Dedupe, true. Prepare, blah. Include node, true. Identifier, that stuff. Then here we have overwrite, which is a boolean. Filter, which copied the type. Dedupe is a boolean. Prepare is a function that takes the build directory and doesn't return anything. Oh, it may return a promise, right? You may need to do something asynchronous there. So let that return a promise, and then on the prepare stuff we await, and then that. Moving on. Include node identifier. Where was I? Okay, prepare returns a promise. Include node is a boolean by default true, and identifier is a string. Oh, all of these are optional, so all of them should have a little lovely question mark, and maybe that was the mistake. We'll see. Now, the path to your application isn't a directory. Output path already exists. Maybe I should include like output already exists and you told me not to overwrite it. Whatever. If the process platform is Windows and your output doesn't end with .exe, then and Windows executable must end in .exe. I was thinking about maybe adding the .exe for you. And then the command could look exactly the same on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. No, too much magic. but it's fair for me to test for that. Okay, so here the build directory will be a random directory. And then here I pass the filter along. If dedup, then run dedup. Prepare passing the build directory. If include node, then do that. Everything in here stays the same. Okay, I am happy to commit this. And the tests are passing, so my problem was the question marks that I was missing. So it is 8 on my time zone. So we'll leave for tomorrow the problem of adding all those command line parameters that match these arguments here. And we will also go over the issues and see if we are missing something. Oh, I guess we are missing something that I know already. We are missing removing the build directory. So build directory. Do we want to remove the build directory at the end? So if remove build directory, then await fs remove of build directory, and remove build directory will be in here somewhere. So override filter dedup prepare include node blah blah blah. By default it will be, you know what, by default it will be true. And then right after include node boolean. And that was not the case before. By default it would not remove the build directory but now by default it will remove the build directory at the end. And I wonder if I should return, I'm not returning anything. I wonder if I should return the build directory for whatever reason. Well, I guess if you really need it, you could have a prepared thing. And what else would you like to do with the build directory after you're done? So, yeah, I'll not return the build directory. Felipe says, you can leave some of the options for advanced users that will work only pragmatically and not from the CLI, like all the functions for filter and extra steps. Yeah, but I can also do something like you can pass me a list of paths to ignore, and then I can provide a default filter that will look at those paths. So I'll try to cover the reasonable cases from the command line as well. So let's, before we wrap up, we have here the builds directory, which with a bunch of applications in there. So how about we clean everything and we run the tests again, and we should have, by the end of this, nothing in the builds directory. The builds directory itself will exist, but nothing will be in there because now we by default clean the build directory. So yeah, Felipe, I agree that we don't need to cover everything, but I think it's reasonable for us to have everything that we can support on the command line, let's support on the command line. Everything that doesn't make sense, like maybe the prepare, or maybe you can just give me a list of commands to run in prepare. We'll see. But we'll do that tomorrow. I'll just check if the tests pass and if the caxa directory will be, the builds directory will be empty by the end of this. It seems like it will be because I can see some things being created and then removed. The tests have passed. The builds directory is clean. The applications directory will have some stuff. The examples directory, the logs directory. It shouldn't have, it shouldn't have anything with a number in there. The applications directory will have some things with numbers in there. Looks good to me. Okay, yeah, let's wrap this up. So all the changes from remove build directory. Okay, and I'm pushing everything I have. And what's nice about this is that the tests will run in Linux and Windows as well. And with that, we'll wrap it up. So tomorrow I am going to add command line parameters to support all these options we introduced. and I will probably push 2.0. That will probably be the end of this series of streams about caxa. I think we are ready to wrap this up, this series. We'll see. But in any case, thank you all for joining me today. Thank you, Felipe, for all the suggestions. I did try to reach you via Twitter, but I don't know if you saw it. But Felipe, if you're interested in joining me in the stream, I will be happy to have you. I don't know how to get in touch with you, but if you can send me an email to the email address I just pasted on the chat, I would love to have you over as a guest. You seem to know a lot more about Node.js than I do, so that would be delightful. Everyone else who was here, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for supporting me on PayPal and Patreon. And I hope you're liking this. I hope you're learning something. I see you tomorrow, 5:30 UTC.